you should see the indicator on the screen. There it is. Sandrine, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing that I like to think about when I think about participation is that it's not always only happening in the classroom. There is everything that's done in preparation or in collaboration with other students, but that might also answer one of the other question, which is how to make classroom open to people with anxiety. And that is a real thing, especially in my field in languages. There is actually foreign language anxiety. It's something that's studied. So giving several opportunities for students to participate, not just in real time, face to face, but in the course, and giving them the opportunity to build up their participation skills during because it's not something we want to avoid either. But one thing that I liked in the article that mentioned that it's going to look student goals for participation are going to look differently. They're all going to be different. So thinking that maybe for some students, just if their goal is to speak at the beginning, to just even have the courage to come up and to speak for a little bit, and then to increase that. For others, it might actually be to not speak as much and to respect more, to be more mindful of the conversation that's happening and to not always speak. So these two things that I think for me, as I was reading the article and thinking about my practice, is participation not just face-to-face in real time, and also that it's going to look differently for every student.
Yeah, and I think it's really an important point that you make. Participation doesn't mean the same thing for everybody, right? And that just, if we stop and think about that, that makes a lot of sense, right? We participate in any group activity. People bring their own skills, their own areas of expertise to the session or the activity that they join, right? It doesn't all look the same. So providing, and this is a really good universal design for learning element as well, a strategy as well, providing your students with different ways to participate. So for example, in this active teaching lab, you can raise your hand and talk verbally, get on camera, do that if you want to. If you don't want to, we have the chat that you can jump into. Or if you don't want to use the chat, you can use the activity sheet and jump in that way. So we've got 3 different ways that let you participate. Now, a potential danger is it's difficult sometimes for instructors to come up with multiple ways to do that, right? It's extra work to do that. Certainly for both students and the instructor, it's difficult to say, all right, I've got to listen to what's happening. I've got to monitor what's happening on chat. I've got to see what's happening on the activity sheet or whatever that structured thing is. This requires a little bit more work. But there are ways that we can even saying here's a synchronous way and here's an asynchronous way. That's 2 things. They don't have to be monitored at the same time necessarily. We can go back later on and monitor the asynchronous thing because it's asynchronous. That's the beautiful thing about asynchronicity, right? It doesn't have to be monitored in real time. So a really good point about that. And Sandrine, I see your hand is still up. Do you have something else to say, or does anyone else have a point or thought to add to that? And one of the thoughts somebody's added, let students come up with their own goals for participation. In this way, it will look this way. It'll look a little bit different for everybody, right? But it's their own goals, and it's supported by them. Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to build off of what Sandrine had just talked about when talking about kind of students that have more anxiety about talking, kind of in class. One way that I've tried is requiring students to participate in a discussion post prior to the start of class. So if it's like 1 or 2 days before, and then I'll go and read through all of the discussion posts and take notes on kind of good summary statements or interesting stories that students shared. And so then I kind of systematically target, if I know somebody isn't real comfortable with sharing, I rotate it, but then I'll say, you know, so-and-so in your post, you talked about that. Could you kind of explain it to the class and, you know, expand on it a little bit more? So it's sort of a way for them to prepare before coming. Because I mean, even I find myself in group situations where I don't necessarily think well on my feet, but I can contribute if I've thought, you know, more thoroughly about it kind of outside the class time. So that's one way I've kind of called on people specifically, but have given them an extra chance to think about what they might contribute asynchronously before we talk about it live.
Excellent. And in our what is it, the bottom of page 3 or whatever, we've got a thing that says preparing. One way to do this is to tell them, hey, I would, in addition to bringing up this idea, the ideas that you see in the asynchronous discussions yourself, say, hey, student, send a private message. I saw that you made this really good point. Would you be willing to expand on that in class? And that way they can say, oh my gosh, class is 2 days from now. I've got a lot of anxiety about this, but they can prepare for that and do it in a way that sort of fits their schedule. One of the really difficult things for people with anxiety is being put on the spot, right? So even giving them a chance to prepare a little bit, to think about, well, how is the best way for me to do that, helps a lot. Dan, go ahead. You're muted still, Dan.
Sorry, lowered my hand but didn't unmute. I love that that idea, and I want to add to it as well that you could offer. I mean, say I'd like you to expand on it, or you can also offer to be the mouthpiece for it and say, do you mind if I bring this up? And if someone is shy about their ideas, about sharing the ideas directly, you know, in a class of 300 people, that can be really intimidating. But if the instructor kind of takes what they said and amplifies it without calling attention to who actually said it, that's a way to really underline that they contributed and you value it, and it moves the conversation ahead, but you're not putting them on the spot at all, because it's not, they're not even expected to do the speaking, and that is participation. So
yeah, and in some ways we're going up one cell here, which we talk about how do we measure participation. Sandrine puts in chat, not every participation needs to be monitored by teachers, and in that article Gillis talks about it's really difficult. There's often 2 ways that we as instructors measure participation. Most often we try to recall afterwards, oh, so-and-so, they are always participating, and that other person, I never hear from them, so they must not be participating at all. So that's kind of using our recall, and that's not great, right? We know that our recall is bad and biased and all kinds of other things. Another one is to count on, oh, Dan spoke, 1 mark for Dan. And I've been in K-12 classrooms where they do this. They carry, the instructor carries around a whiteboard with all the students' names on it. So-and-so speaks, get a little mark. So-and-so speaks, get a little, little hashtag or hash mark. And eventually, at the end of the day, they say, oh, so-and-so spoke this many times, other person spoke this many times. We've got a numerical value there that translates to the grade that they get for participation. Now, the obvious thing about that is that students start saying, all right, I need to participate X number of times, but the quality of my participation doesn't have to be great. I just have to say, yes, I agree, done. Yes, good point, short, not useful participation remark. And then we get a lot of noise, right? We don't have thoughtful participation. So having thoughtful participation is really important. I see in the chat, Sandrine added again, reflection, giving students a chance in the class to reflect on their participation, but also to reflect on the concept, and that, maybe doing it with a neighbor. That could count as participation, even though it's not in front of the whole class. There's still that sort of connection, that opportunity to get feedback from the person that they're sitting next to. Jerome, go ahead and talk. And still muted.
Yeah, I couldn't get, there was a window open on top of the microphone icon. Yeah, I just wanted to react a little bit to what you were saying, John, about the sort of numerical approach, purely quantitative. I've done this in class, and I agree that it's certainly not an end-all solution. I will say, though, in my experience, I've never had the case for students to just participate to say 2 words and leave it at that. It's just, I've never seen it. So generally people who participate do actually contribute to the conversation. My idea has always been that not grading qualitatively would encourage people to say things and take chances rather than saying, well, I've got to think and make sure that my participation is good before I open my mouth. So, I could see how it could easily be abused and someone just raising their hand and saying, yes, and leaving it at that. I just never experienced it in several semesters of using this approach with, mostly 200 level courses.
Although I bet that you have seen it in your online discussion forums where you have the assignment of make a post and go respond to 2 other posts. That's where it's sort of most obvious, right? Where they say, I agree with what the person commented above me says, or good point. It's not really it doesn't add anything to that. It just sort of says, I responded, I'm done. I can leave this now.
I most definitely have, including a student who literally copied and pasted the same answer onto everybody's posts.
They're so smart at figuring out how to game the system and make their work a little bit less hard for them, right?
But I added to my discussion forum post a sentence that simply says, make sure that you have the type of conversation with your peers that you would want to have. And that you engage with each other's ideas. And that sort of cut that kind of attitude in the bud. And I have not seen any of this now. And my students are having actually substantive conversation. Those who choose to participate in forums, at least, have good conversations there.
Excellent.
So just adding a bit of a layer of intention.
A layer of intention. So things like, what is the reasons for doing that? What are giving them praise for doing that? Down at the bottom here, we've got several ideas on easy and medium ways to structure your conversations. So instead of saying respond and the sky's the limit, whatever you talk about, you can say respond as you respond as this professional in the discipline, you respond as this person in the discipline or a different discipline. You respond by saying, I agree with everything, and here's 2 more sources. If you give them some roles to respond by, they can't just come up with nothing and do the generic response. They have to think a little bit harder. So ways to structure those conversations and the feedback that they give each other, the ways that they participate can help them, as you say, have a little bit more thoughtful intention about how am I responding, because it's not just a default response. Good. Any other thoughts on that before and apologize for scrolling up and down if you're getting dizzy. All right, how do we make a welcoming environment for active participation from non-native English speakers? And in some ways, oh, I see somebody's got their hand raised. I'm trying to think who that is. Lisa, go ahead, Lisa. And if you're talking, there you go.
Button, finally. I was wondering, I think you just scrolled past it where you talk in the sheet talk about rewarding certain types of contributions. I was wondering if you could give ideas about how, if we're not like assigning points per se, what does it mean to reward contributions?
Excellent. Great. And when I put reward down there, actually just about half an hour ago, I thought maybe that's not the best word, because it does sort of imply some sort of extrinsic reward. But if you think about what are some of the rewards for being a good person, somebody says, oh, thank you. Like, oh, thank you is thank you for showing up on time. Thank you all for all starting, the course together. Thank you for preparing for today's session. It was great. We had a great session. Thank you all for being part of that. There's no points involved in that, but I would leave that session thinking, all right, that was fun. I like that, and I feel appreciated. That's one way to reward. Anyone have other ideas on how to reward without points? Acknowledgement. Acknowledge is good. Yep. Okay. Let's talk about non-native speakers, English speakers. We've got some good suggestions here. We've talked about some of them already by giving people time to prepare and giving different opportunities, different ways, both synchronous and asynchronous, written versus raise your hand and speak in front of a class of people where you might feel really self-conscious about your diction, etc. And am I using the right words for that? Like that can be intimidating. Giving somebody a chance to write down what they want to say, proofread it, and then share it helps them with that as well. And I see Angela, go ahead.
Hey, I think we've kind of touched on this a little, but also if the activity that is happening, particularly if it's in smaller groups so people are able to interact, if they're creating something, particularly if it's something visual, that also might be a way to help with, a student who might not feel as comfortable speaking in the small group or speaking in front of the class might really dig like helping to put together whatever it is that you're creating. So if there's something that is sort of non-verbal that could also be created, might be another strategy to go about that.
Yeah, created or curated. One of my favorite assignments is, hey, we're going to talk about this concept. Go out onto the internet and share, find something and bring it back to the class. And that way, all they have to do is pick and, copy paste. Or, they don't have to create something. So, the artistically inclined might not want to create something. They don't have to write something. They don't have to say it. They just have to go find representation. The other added beautiful thing about that is that we tend to find and share representations that speak to us, right? And this is a way to connect to and make our learning more personal, right? So I'm probably not going, if I'm going to go find something on some topic that I don't know much about, I've got to go look through several websites before I find something that makes sense to me. And I'm going to choose that one probably because it'll sort of speak to me rather than to what I think needs primarily, than rather what I think is the perfect high level discussion of whatever the topic is.
Yeah, and yes. I just saw Sandrine's comment about the type of language that's being used, and particularly if it's like an informal conversation, I try to let students know it's okay if you're not using the correct terminology in this particular space. Like, I'd rather you break something down into super basic vocabulary, but you're kind of explaining the principle of something versus like being really precise. Because I'm in STEM, so I just had a student a couple weeks ago that had to put together a video presentation, and they were very concerned because they were like, I'm not sure if I'm going to be using the words correctly. And I said, you know what? If you break it down and you're just using everyday common language, but I can tell you understand what you're talking about, 100%, that's an A. Like, so, making that clear that it's okay to use different kinds of language.
And reward that risk. So if they do venture outside of their comfort zone, and that, say, wow, that's awesome. It might be a little bit wrong. It might not be perfect, but we're about developing you as a person in the field, right? Or somebody in the knowledge discipline that we're the community that we want to develop, I guess. So the way to get to that expert level is to make a lot of mistakes, and they need to be able to make a lot of mistakes and feel safe about that. If they make a mistake or they don't do it 100% perfectly and they get slapped down, bad grade for that, they're not going to do that again. They're going to play it safe. They're not going to take risks. They're going to do mediocre but acceptable work. So how can we foster that risk taking? And the other thing about succeeding all the time is you don't know what failure looks like, right? And so you don't understand sort of the system of whatever is the system that is underlying our discipline. I see Megan's got her hand up. Go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, actually, I really liked what Angela said, and kind of adding to that, I thought if you do want students to speak, sometimes that there's that extra anxiety with not knowing the words or just not being able to come up with them on the fly. So I thought having scripted activity, a recording or a video that they can practice, so they know that they can say the words, it could be helpful as well.
That's awesome. Great. Good. Thank you. Sandrine, go ahead. And if you're speaking, you're muted, Sandrine.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, to build up on that, what I was thinking about it, depending on the type of communication we expect our students to do, to be very explicit about the rule, the cultural rule and the norms and the language that goes with that type of communication. For example, a debate is going to look very different across cultures. So just being aware of that and making that language and the norms explicit. Right.
That's great. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I see a thumbs up from Jerome as well. Thank you. I think that might be the first time that we've seen those reactions used in Teams. I've seen them used in Zoom, but I haven't seen them used in Teams. So good job. Yeah, and giving people practice for those. So the first time that they do a debate, they've got to learn what are the rules for the culture, what are the expectations that the instructor has for this class. So that first time might not be great, but the second time they will have learned from the hopefully first low stakes one where they made a lot of mistakes and it was good because they made a lot of mistakes. They got a lot of praise for making mistakes. And then the second one, they did the script or what was expected of them a little bit better. So as we move them towards sort of the norms and practices of our communities of practice that we're in, they need to have opportunities to learn that language, to learn that discourse. Megan, I see your hand. Is your hand still up, or is that just my screen not refreshing fast? Hands down. Okay. All right. And I encourage everybody to keep on adding other ideas in this right-hand column, as Dan is doing. And we're going to go on to the next one. What are some activities that can count as participation that are not speaking in class? Great. We've got the discussion post here. Things like a collaborative document using Google Docs, Google Slides, Jamboard if it's supported by your department. We've probably all seen Padlets, even though that's not a supported tool by the university, it might be supported by your department. Speaking less can be an improvement. Okay, so that's one for me as a fourth grader on till very recently and continuing. I'm always the person to raise my hand right away. So for me, my improvement participation is making space to let other people participate. Like that's my personal goal in improving classroom participation, giving them a little bit more space. I'm going to do that again by giving you all 15 seconds to raise your hand or unmute and talk. I always feel like I'm failing. Oh, Dan, go ahead.
Hi, John. This would be a good place for me to talk a little bit about what this article that we keep mentioning, this Gillis article, says that is so, what I think unique and really like powerful in how she talks about participation, and it's that she looks at it, she's identified these different dimensions of what participation could look like in class or out of class, and then she asked the students in her class to set personal goals and to write those at the beginning of the year, reflecting on how they participate in their other courses as well, and then she asked them to review their progress toward those goals, and that way they are the ones deciding what would be an improvement in their participation, and then they're the ones that are also assessing that. And it takes it out of her hands, so she doesn't have to try to guess what each student needs. And she, in what she writes in the article, she finds out from these different groups of students where she's used this, that very often there are things that she couldn't possibly know. Like one student saying, I have trouble parking every morning because of traffic. So for me, participation would be getting there on time, and I'm going to really work on that. And then that student does. And there's no way that the teacher could know that the student either had that problem, acknowledged that problem, or was making an effort. But to see that student say, yeah, I've been on time every day this semester, it's the first time this ever happened to me because of this effort, is like, that's great participation. But there's no way she could know that except that it was student's own goal. And likewise, the one about a student saying, I dominate conversation, so for me, participation is going to be giving space to other people to talk, and then reflecting later on to say, yeah, I did it, I participated, I shared my opinion, but I didn't dominate, is like a great improvement in the skill of participation that probably benefited them right across all their studies and all their courses. But it's one that the student teacher might have actually penalized if what they were looking for was, talking and being loud and raising your hand, when for that student, that was the opposite of what they needed to do to improve. So with that said, I'll mute.
I'm going to bring up this. I'm putting together some slides for the Teach Online at UW session that I'm participating in tomorrow. You might have all heard of active learning, and one of the things that she says that learning feedback requires is an intelligent agent. One of the points that I'm going to make tomorrow is that as an instructor, we are not the best people to be that intelligent agent to provide feedback, because there are just too many students. One, there are too many students. Two, we don't know their students as well as they know each other, oftentimes. So we can't provide good, intelligent, worthwhile feedback. But the peer groups can. Because if they get to know each other in a small or intimate group, they can learn more about each other and provide that feedback about what is necessary, and prompt that kind of individual reflection that we just can't do. We could do it in a small group, but we can't do it in large groups. So whatever we can do to have our students do some of the work for us in making those connections, helping us reflect on what we need and how we need it best, that's going to help everybody. Jerome, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question for Dan based on his reading of the article. I'm definitely going to read the article as soon as I can, but I was wondering how you encourage students to kind of be self-reflective about what their own styles of participation, where they need to improve, and identify these things. I can think as an 18 or 19-year-old, it's not necessarily we're not always super self-aware. At 47, I don't think I'm always super self-aware. So how do you help students get to that point when they could say, well, for me, especially for the students who tend to over-participate, to realize that actually may not be a constructive behavior for the class as a whole? How do you help them get there?
That's a great question. I have to admit that this is something that I came to when I'm not in classroom teaching, as you know, right now. So when I was in classroom teaching, I think my approach to participation was, I remember so-and-so speaking, or I don't, or I remember them being pretty active in the class, or they weren't. And that's really arbitrary. And I regret that was where I was at, but that was where I was at. So this article, this Alana Gillis article, was one that really, she said it so well that I really felt like, oh man, I wish I could go in the classroom and try that out, because I bet that would work. I have used self-reflection a lot in other teaching, where if you have students setting goals and then checking in on their goals and they write about it, you can see, they are telling you how they're progressing toward those. And so I know that works, and I know how much value comes out of that. I've never done it and tried it myself, but the framework that she proposes of kind of being really intentional about laying out these different ways in which participation can, improve. So setting out these 5 skills as she breaks them out and giving examples and maybe talking about past students' experiences, getting them to write those and then review those, and then getting them to check in on them in the middle, giving some feedback there, and at the end. So actually making it into kind of a reflective writing, journaling assignment regularly across the semester. Now, when you have 800 students, that's not going to happen in your overall class, but it can happen in, say, a discussion section. And if that means that the teacher doesn't have to run around with a clipboard tallying people's contributions, then having those little extra written assignments 2-3 times in the semester with little tiny bits of feedback given just to keep them on track or to correct the few that need correction, or redirection, is probably, less work once you're used to it. And probably, it puts most of the work onto the student because they're the one that have to really self-reflect and then self-assess. And then your job is just to check in on that process and kind of guide it a little bit. That's what I suspect would happen. And I'd say read the article because I think she does an amazing job of laying this out.
I want to amplify one of the things that Dan said, which was having other students share and maybe past students. Like, there's one thing as a student listening to an instructor who is a power figure and who, doesn't understand life. It's like a child saying to an adult, well, you don't understand. It's another thing listening to a student who looks very much like them, who was in their shoes, who you might say, oh, I relate to this person. And so getting past students to say, wow, one of the things that I learned here was how to participate more or participate less or to make some space. And if you can get them to come in and share, even as a quote, as a video, something like that, that's very powerful. And I see Lindy's got her hand up. Go ahead, Lindy.
Yeah, so one of the things that we used to do in our TA training in the chemistry department, and we're actually going to use this activity in one of our courses in pharmacy this summer, is a constructive and destructive group behaviors activity. And the list comes from somebody here at UW-Madison. It's been really hard to actually source that and cite it, but I'm putting it at the very bottom. What the list is, but what you do is you have students reflect on 6 what do we consider to be cooperative or constructive group behaviors, and then ask them about the destructive group behaviors and do that reflection and then talk to each other, think, pair, share. And it really, I think people get a lot of insight through that activity. And in fact, I had a TA one time say he was returning back to teaching after being in research associate or research assistant for a while. He said, this describes so much of the dynamics in our team meetings that I feel like I should lead this activity for my entire lab. And so they really notice things about themselves and others. And then and one thing that students sometimes see is that what can be a strong or a constructive group behavior amplified becomes destructive, and they start to make those connections.
Really good point. The context and nuance is important. Sandrine, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so that was in response to Jérôme's question earlier about how to help students reflect on their own participation. So one practical way that I do that is through an exit ticket at the end of every synchronous class that I have. They just rate their participation on a scale from 1 to 10. But they also journal about that, and depending on the goals that they have set themselves, then they can go back and reflect about how have they improved, have they propose a prompt, and I can think of some of the suggestions that have been added since. The prompt can be, I don't know, yeah, we can open or, but have them reflect on that regularly throughout the semester. Would be one way to help them reflect on that.
Yeah, building those exit tickets or any sort of reflection activity into any activity helps them at a metacognitive level. How do I learn? How can I learn better? What are the things that I can do? But it also, that's one more thing that the students, it's another opportunity for the students to think about what they did, right? So the actual content itself it's another touch point for the content. Jerome, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks to all of you who've offered suggestions. I have used the constructive destructive activity in seminars before, and the issue that I had when I used it is that it seemed to like make something click at the beginning of the term, and then you know, it sort of like was left by the wayside by the third week of the semester.
You did that.
So yeah, right. We've checked the box. I've thought about it, and now I'm going to go on and participate in the way that I'm used to. But I like very much the idea of maybe combining this with a journaling or sort of this idea that's been raised several times that practice makes perfect, and that it's not just what you do once, but it's doing it repeatedly and being self-reflexive about what you've done and then building from one week to the next. So thanks for all the suggestions. Great.
Hey, I want to give you a 5-minute reminder. If you've got a 2 o'clock meeting, you are free to go. We're going to keep on going to 2 o'clock, and I don't know. I always stick around a few minutes after that for people to continue discussion. But let's keep on going. Let's see. We've tried it and it didn't work, and we tried it again and it didn't work again, and we tried it again and it didn't work. What do we do next? Any ideas? See some ideas here. I really like this one. Good. Every time it failed, what did you learn from that? It never works the first time, second time, third time, fourth time. Eventually, like it in order to succeed, we have to change the culture of the classroom. If it continues to fail, that means that there's something about the culture that we need to adjust. So look around. What are some of the other things in that course that might reinforce that? Are there things that you can do in the course to make it succeed instead of fail? So if we're all doing these kinds of things, and then all of a sudden we say, oh, try this thing, and it's so different from this sort of thing that is part of the culture of, and we're not just talking about the culture of your class, we're talking about the culture of the university, the culture of Western higher education in general that we are fighting against here. And that's going to be a bigger lift. So if it doesn't fail in 2-3 times, that makes sense. One of the things that I heard early on in the pandemic was we need to ask our students to participate more. Explicitly say, this is tough for me, and this was with remote learning. This was tough. This is tough for me because I don't see your faces. I need you to participate more than you usually would, and I'm asking you to do that. The students will set the bar of participation with all of the other classes, not just your class, but all of the classes. And if your class requires more participation because you want more participation, they're going to come and they're going to give you this level unless you say, my class is different. This is a class that requires more participation. I want you to please participate more than you normally would. And oftentimes they'll be like, oh, okay, I guess that's the way it is for this class, because they're very good at adapting to, and they want to please you, right? Because you're assigning the grades. So this is a way to sort of try to change that culture. Other thoughts on that? All right, and then we've got some really good. There's also the group Padlet forms. If you make it part of the norm, if you make it part of the routine, then it becomes less of a novel, weird thing. So again, every class period, have a poll. Every activity that you do, add that reflective question where you think about it and respond. How much curation of materials can you have the students do just as part of the routine? The first thing that we do when we look at a new topic is I say, go find me a source, your favorite source on this topic, and then bring it back, share it with everybody else, and then we'll talk about it. Like that's everybody contributing to something, you know, at different levels, because we don't expect great things the first time that they get to a topic, but that's okay. It's participation. Awkward silence. Okay, look at this. Woo! Lots of ideas. Lots of it's a big topic, right? And wow, I've got that awkward silence here whenever I shut up and try to get people to talk. And it's hard. You just got to get used to it. It's 1:59 right now, and you can see that there's no way that we're going to get through the rest of these things. But I do encourage you to take a look at the right-hand column here. And then also think about things like, how do you create or find new activities for participation? We have a bunch of resources down below that I would encourage you to take a look at as well. Dan, go ahead. And unmute.
John, just there was one question that Sandrine pasted in the chat, which was at the very bottom of the document, and there were a number of thumbs up, like, can we talk about that one? So if anybody is sticking around to talk about one more thing, if you might consider jumping to that one. It's
to the bottom
how do we
of
support. Yeah, it's in the chat. I could read it out. It's how do we support marginalized students in class pair participation when they may be faced with microaggressions or ignorance or something that increases energy expenditure around their identity?
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. And Marika, yes, it will be. Okay. This is too big of a question to answer in one small response. So what I will say is we're going to be talking about, let's see, do I have that up? I have it up somewhere. Let me go find it. All right. Let me put it in here. Oh, that just totally did not work. Let me undo that. We're going to be having an active teaching lab on that on May 5th. That'll be our last active teaching lab. It's going to be building equity and belonging into your course 10 ways. And we're going to look at ways that instructors are implementing structures to provide a welcoming, and we're going to specific mostly on anti-racist in that session. But I suspect that a lot of the ideas are going to apply to other marginalized student groups as well. So come on back, and every week in labs, we talk about a little bit of these, or we talk about teaching practices that address some of these equitable issues. So thank you all for being here. Dan, go ahead. You've got your hand up again, or still?
Sorry, still, I didn't take it down.
Okay.
I was typing something in the bullet points. It looks like there's a lot of good bullet points there, but maybe Sandrine, if you have questions you wanted to bring up out of that.
Yeah. Thanks, Jerome. Thanks, Lisa. Go ahead, Sandrine.
No, I'm okay. I just wanted to make sure. I was going to ask if we could talk about that, but yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Okay. And I'm going to, I'll try to remember to bring this set of questions to that active teaching lab on the 5th. So,
John, at the risk of keeping everybody here to talk to someone that's in the other room anyway that I could go straight over to talk with, I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
One of the things I see with this is just, I mean, even the fact that you're asking this question is acknowledging that this is happening. And that's a really important thing. It's like, as an instructor, keep in mind that participation, being there in the space, is not an equal, equitable experience for all students. That there's a lot of things that can be going on that you're not intending and not aware of as an instructor, and maybe can't be aware of. And just to be like searching for ways to repair that and to support and scaffold and provide other opportunities, and so that you're not just, you know, assuming this kind of equal experience that is going to be of equal benefit to all. And so having that in your mind is the first strategy toward finding other strategies to make it better.
Excellent. And Auden, thanks for adding your other thoughts, other ideas and bullet points into the activity sheet as well. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Will you talk a little bit more, give another or a specific example of how when you said you'll tell the students, like, this is the topic we're going to talk about, like, go find something and then we'll come back and talk about it again. That sounds, I guess I've only taught either face-to-face or solely online, and I'm wanting to do a blended course for the fall, and so that kind of sparked my interest in that and thinking about how to incorporate that. But I want a specific example if you could give one.
This fits under the hat of empowering students, right? Recognizing that they have autonomy and they have their own set of interests and they might not match our interests, right? So traditionally what I think we do as educators, as teachers, is we say, oh my gosh, we've got this concept, let me pick a reading, and we will go through ourselves, 5 or 7 different readings and say, this one is the best reading because what? Because it covers the concepts that I want to cover. That's great, but we should recognize that our students don't look like us, don't act like us, don't have our drives and inspirations and experiences and skills. So the reading that is best for us might not be the source, the content, the resource that is best for them. So what I've done in the past is I've said, hey, the internet's a big thing. There's a billion items out there. Go find the thing that speaks to you on this topic and then come back, bring it, I'll have it in a discussion forum, an online forum where they share it. They can see that, if somebody shares one, then somebody else has to say, oh, that one's been taken. So they have got to go find a second thing. Now, what I've found is that students will go look at 2 or 3 different things before they pick. They don't pick. They go to Google first, and the one that's at the very top, that's the one that's most likely to get chosen first, right? Standard. But when that one's chosen, then the choices diversify quite a bit, and people start saying, oh, I found this other one because that one was taken. So they'll go find the one that speaks to them. And if you think about like even YouTube videos, there are 15-minute YouTube videos, there are YouTube videos by, 10-year-olds, there are YouTube videos by 50-year-olds, and we might choose different ones because the 10-year-old video is refreshing and they've done it in a really interesting way, whereas the 50-year-old video speaks about the concept the way that I've always thought about it, and so it's nothing new and exciting for me. So anyway, they go gather the resources, they bring it back. Other students will see those resources too, and they might scan through it. They won't read through every one or watch every video or whatever, but they'll scan through it. So it's a lot of different ways of looking at that material. And then we come back and I've got a 1-page handout on here are the points that I would like, so we're all on the same page. Here are the points that I feel you need to know. If your source didn't cover these points or you haven't seen these points, maybe you should find a source that does, and I'll include my official reading at that point. But if it did, they're independent learners. Why not let them independently learn?
I think that's fantastic. And I think my other question is, do you help define what a source is in terms of like, are you requiring people to look for research articles sometimes, or is it varied different types of sources, kind of wide open?
I've done this with graduate students.
Yes, so, and I'm same. I'm an OT teaching graduate school students. So
if I had a freshman class or first year class, I might do that differently and say, but even then, I've seen YouTube videos on the Lion King that explained some really cool concept in anthropology.
Sure.
So, that wouldn't fit under a source, but it was a student project that somebody else did who was, taught by that, and they've got the concepts right. So why not?
Why not? Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Excellent. Good. Other thoughts? Anyone else? I'm going to stop recording now. And Dan, Sandrine,